to have you here. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to join you.
So we'll start off with our icebreaker question for everybody, which is, how did you get into herbalism? What did your path into this practice look like?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that question. And I was thinking about like, how much details do I give? But because we're also going to end up talking about the somatic therapy aspect of my practice, I've decided to give you the longer version because it all ties in together. So as a background, I grew up in a very religious family, which meant that wasn't I wasn't allowed to be myself in a lot of ways. I wasn't really allowed to be connected to the plants and to any ideas of deeper connection to nature and stuff like that was seen as demonic or wrong and dark and had all kinds of different language around it. But there was a very narrow pathway in which I was allowed to move through the world. And I was a curious person. I'm also a very sensitive person. So I pick up on a lot of things. And I've always noticed maybe the more subtle layers that other people miss. But in my family, I wasn't really allowed to express that part of myself. And so the long story is that I was very disconnected from myself. And it was when I was 20, I was backpacking in Southeast Asia. And I discovered yoga as you do as a young person backpacking around the world. And that was the first time that I was kind of invited back into myself and actually introduced to practices where I was allowed to be connected to my sensitivity, to my awareness of the world. And there was some language for it and it was celebrated instead of it being shut down or punished or, I was often in trouble for my curiosities in the past. All of a sudden there was like space for that. And so that yoga brought me to Victoria, where I was doing a yoga teacher training and eventually ended up at Pacific Rim College, which is located in Victoria, as a nutrition student because I'd always been interested in nutrition. And in the first semester, I had to take these herbal classes as electives. And I honestly was intentionally getting them out of the way. I was like, what are these classes? What is herbalism? I'll put them in my first semester, get them out of the way, and then I can just focus on nutrition for the next 3 years. And the first class I took was energetics of herbalism. So we got right off the bat into vitalism, into energetics, into drop dosing herbs. And again, as such a sensitive being, I felt the plant so deeply. And there was a context for it because we were being taught and really flushing out these deeper layers. And it felt so meaningful and so deep right off the hop that I just couldn't ignore it. And so I didn't immediately switch programs. I kind of was a little uncertain about how to move forward, but I felt so drawn to the herbs. So I just kept adding these classes, these elective classes into my semesters for a few more semesters and was kind of humming and hawing about what to do. I knew in my heart that I wanted to pursue the herbalism, but because of all the religious programming and all of the complexities, I had to do a lot of personal unwinding and figuring out how am I going to move forward with this completely different worldview that is so contrary to my family's and that I knew that they would have a problem with. I knew that it wasn't gonna jive with how they perceived the world. And so over time, I finally gained the confidence and ended up switching programs. And at that point, I had just lived a very intense life. I had been quite a partier up until that point. I had worked at a tree planting camp as a cook. And about a year into my herbal studies, I hit a really extreme burnout where my nervous system just couldn't handle my lifestyle anymore. And I crashed very hard and actually had to take a year off of school. And that was what ended up bringing me into more of the somatic side of things. Because all of a sudden it was like, I can't ignore my body anymore. I was trying to kind of use the busyness that I had been prompting my life up into that point to get through things and to ignore my trauma and my pain and all the things. But then I was bringing my sensitivity online at the same time by starting to get into herbalism. And those two things clashed very hard. And I ended up just crashing and burning really hard. I developed really severe insomnia where I would honestly barely sleep in the night. I was super anxious, like bordering on panic attacks, like almost all the time. Um, and so I knew I needed to start getting more curious. I didn't even have language for somatics or the nervous system or really like I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I just knew that it wasn't working whatever I was doing. And so that took me deeper into my experience of exploring what does it mean to have a body, be in a body, have a nervous system, take care of a nervous system. And eventually I found the somatic program that I ended up doing. So once I took a year off herbalism and then came back and finished the program, then my next step was to do the somatic therapy training. And um, yeah, I just knew that even though I was like burnt out and I really wanted to just get going on my business and focus on herbalism. Again, it was just such a heart calling in the same way that the herbs were that I knew my next step needed to be the somatic therapy training. And so I followed that golden thread and ended up finding a way to weave it all together. It's been very unconventional. I don't really know other people actually practicing in the same way that I do. It's kind of its own Marie coded thing, but it's been a great experience. And yeah, I think that's all I'll say about my journey so far.
Amazing. Yeah, I was so excited to discuss this with you because it is a very unique symbiotic approach you have with those two modalities. Thank you for sharing that about your journey. It sounds like there's been some challenges for sure for you to follow that part of you that has been so inspired and touched by herbs. And I think that's, common for folks in this day and age to feel some pushback or challenge from our communities, society, families, for studying or wanting to learn more about these traditional and holistic ways of healing because they don't fall directly into our modern day understood scientific ways of seeing the world. And so it's such a brave thing to do, especially when it sounds like you had a family sort of conflict there as well. So thank you for sharing that. And that's incredible to continue on that with that commitment and passion. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what is this somatic work. That is something I feel that is still new for a lot of people to hear about and understand, and also encompasses a lot of different types of practice and modalities. So how would you define somatics and also its relationship to our health and healing?
Yeah. So the word soma is defined as distinguishing the body from the other parts of a person, right? So from the psyche, from our emotional selves, it's specifically focusing in on the body and the experience of being in a physical body. And so I'm specifically practicing somatic therapy, but you could call yoga or dance or breath work or any of these practices where you're connecting with the body in order to experience embodiment. So to be in your body and find that as a healing tool could all be considered different forms of somatic therapy in a sense. When people refer to somatic therapy, they're usually speaking about a form of therapy, so similar to talk therapy, but instead of just chit chatting, instead of just talking, not that people just chit chat in therapy, but there's a deeper focus on the nervous system and what's happening with the physiology. Um, it's easy to talk our way around our problems and to ignore certain things. And our minds are very, very clever and have incredible ways of rerouting the attention to avoid things that we want to avoid. And we do it subconsciously. We don't even consciously often know that we're doing this. And a lot of people who come to my practice report having done a lot of talk therapy and feeling like they only could get so far with it because it won't take you to places that your consciousness is purposefully avoiding. Unless somebody's like incredibly good at catching that stuff and redirecting, it's very, very hard to track. But the body doesn't lie. And so we can't ignore, let's just say, our heart's starting to beat faster, our shoulders starting to get a little more tense, our breathing changing. These kind of things give us clues about what is creating stress and tension and aversion in the body, and about exactly how, if we think of the vital force, if that's a term people are familiar, the vital force, or you could call it prana or chi, but how energy flows through the body. There are natural channels of how energy wants to move through the body. And there's, again, clever ways at which we've rerouted and blocked and tightened and directed energy so that we don't need to feel certain parts of ourselves and so that we can ignore certain parts of ourselves in order to not feel trauma, not feel pain, not feel parts of ourselves like maybe our power or our aliveness because that wasn't allowed. Kind of like I described in my family, I wasn't allowed to be observant because when I pointed things out that were incongruent with the religious upbringing, I would literally get in trouble for it. So I turned myself off. I literally became more numb and I used alcohol and other substances to really numb out because I wasn't allowed to have an intact vital force running through my system. And this is not just me who experiences this. This is most people, especially if you think about in our culture from the time that we're very young, we're expected to sit tight in our desks and not move our bodies and not breathe deeply and not express our emotions. Um, and it creates a lot of dissonance from our authentic being. And it creates a lot of this living in the head, as people describe. That is a literal experience. It's not just, oh, I'm in my head. People say that, but it's quite literally your energy, which means your vital force has been only allowed to live in the head and it's not allowed to be rewired back into the body. And so somatic therapy is about catching all of that and mapping it out and helping people to inhabit more of their body and come back into resonance and integrity with who they authentically are, essentially.
Hmm. Great. Thank you. That was such a great answer that really provided a lot of clarity and understanding. And I can't help but think that in this day and age when we're living with record levels of anxiety and, people joke about our capacity to dissociate. This is something that's common. We see it all over the internet on memes and stuff, people joking about dissociating from their lives, from their bodies, as really a coping mechanism. And so it seems like this work is very, very important for the times that we are living in now. And another thing that really stood out to me as well was when you mentioned that this, the way that we might be avoiding certain experiences or processing certain difficult things, but also that we're avoiding actually not feeling our power and
Mhm.
I would love to hear a little bit more about that because that seems like why would we avoid that? Why that's an interesting thing to think about.
Mhm. There are so many reasons why we might avoid that. And the listener can think about that for themselves. What would happen if you were to stand fully in your power? If you were to say what you really wanted to say, if you were to be in your full radiance, does that feel scary? Probably. It feels scary because, especially as women, but not only, we've been conditioned that we're not allowed to be that. We've been persecuted for it, shut down for it. People, I know it's an Australian saying, tall poppy syndrome. Like the tallest poppy is the one to be, um, cut down or to be attacked, essentially. Um, Being in our power in the past for women literally was a highly threatening experience for the nervous system because we had to placate to men because we weren't even allowed to have our own bank accounts. We actually didn't have permission to be in our power. And so if you are in your power, then you're going to say no to things. You're going to stand up for yourself. You're not going to be okay with your husband harming your children and things that were happening in the past that women had to kind of zip their lips and be okay with in order to survive. And now we have inherited that pattern of the good girl behavior, right? Being the good girl, being the nice one, the soft one, the sweet one, the delicate one, the whatever one, and being expected to do a lot and yet stay extremely tempered at the same time and never show too much of our emotions or our power or have too strong of an opinion because there's fear around that of rejection and of being attacked. There's also fear of disappointing other people and letting other people down and letting other people feel their uncomfortable feelings. Because, you know, if I say no to you, you might feel disappointed, you might feel angry, you might feel rejected. And women's tendency, and again, this isn't only women, that's just who I see this with the most, people who were socialized as females is that we feel like we have to swoop in and save everybody. And so building up a tolerance in your nervous system for other people to feel uncomfortable feelings is the only way that we can actually tolerate being in our power. And a lot of people just aren't willing to do that. It's too uncomfortable. It feels too risky. And it's easier to be in the people pleasing fawn response, which fawning is a dissociative response where we ignore how we really feel about a thing and we put on a smile and we act sweet and we smooth things over. And that's how a lot of people move through the world because it's easier in a way. It's like easy, not easy. It doesn't feel good. And yet, in a sense, it is easier.
Yeah, I think that it's also called the people pleasing is another
Mhm.
way of thinking about that. And it, yeah, again, but you know, who are you really pleasing when you're not being yourself? You're not pleasing yourself, and in the longer run, I would suggest you're not pleasing the other people or honoring them or honoring those relationships for sure.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and that's really interesting too to think about of course, this isn't, as you said, limited to women, but I also see a lot of women in my practice, and this is something that I have noticed and is something that we still carry from these many, many years of active systemic oppression and encouragement to really be separated from ourselves and our experience and our power for sure. So how have you seen, or would you, suggest or have theories around how this does show up in our physical health?
Oh my God. Let me get the list going. I would say, like, truly every system of the body. So, for people to understand, just backing up, we say mental health when we're talking about emotional health for some weird reason, because our culture is materialistic and doesn't like to acknowledge that there's emotions. So, just to define, like, this is, yes, it affects our thoughts, but it also affects our emotions, and our emotions are felt in the body. When you feel sad, you feel maybe heaviness, lethargy, a caving in, sensation on a body level. That's what's telling you you're sad. When you feel happy, you feel uplifted. Often your shoulders and your heart are more expansive. There's a sense of more buoyancy in your energy. So, just to clarify that this is because our nervous system isn't just in our brain. Our nervous system is in our whole body. And so there's a reason why when we feel anxious, we get butterflies in our tummy and maybe we even get nauseous. Maybe we even throw up, right? That shows how deeply interconnected these systems are. All of our um, major organs are connected to our nervous system. And when we are under stress, the energy is directed towards surviving that stressor, whatever the perceived threat may be. And that means that things like our immune health, our digestive health, our reproductive health, energy isn't directed towards those systems because it's not a priority. It's more important that we outrun the lion than that we reproduce a baby or a healthy period or don't get a cold, right? So when we're under chronic stress, and stress includes ignoring what's authentic to us, burying our true feelings, having to disassociate from how we really feel, is ways of hiding our stress and trying to carry on. But it ends up manifesting through the physical body. And so it's everything from chronic pain, it's usually chronic type conditions, chronic pain, chronic digestion, of course, all the mental health stuff, anxiety, depression. It can be, yeah, a lot of reproductive issues. It can be every system of the body can be impacted by this. I see a lot of chronic clenching of the teeth, right? People grind their teeth at night. Guess what that's often associated with? People not speaking their truth, people having to clench and hold that vital force that wants to burst through the seams and say what they really mean, and it's pent up and it has to go somewhere. So where does it go? It goes into the jaw, it goes into the shoulders, it goes into the tummy, it goes somewhere. So it's painful to hear this, but I'm just going to be frank that people are making themselves sick by not being authentic, physiologically sick. It's true. And it just is what it is. And I see it all the time. And I've helped a lot of people, not just with their quote mental health, because mental health, it cannot be isolated to the mind. It is a full physiological experience. And when you start working on this stuff, it's honestly, it's not cute and sweet and fun. Everyone's like, I'm going to get regulated. It's like, actually, you're going to have to say what you haven't been saying for 20 years. And
Wow.
if you
Yeah.
really want that tummy ache to go away, that's what it's going to take. Right?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. This work is not for the faint of heart, but the illnesses associated with not doing it are also not for the faint of heart. I mean, I think a lot of folks end up having those sort of crises, health crises and have to make that decision about whether we want to, wade through the depths or continue to be quite ill. And I love what you say too about mental health. And that's something that I've always struggled with, that term, or, more since I've been in the holistic health and herbal world. Cause our moods, our anxiety, our nervous system, exactly. Our nervous system goes through our entire body, with so much of it actually being in our digestive system. And yeah, everything affects our mental health from what we eat. It's not a very good term anymore. It feels a bit outdated, but um, yeah, thanks for that reminder too. So I am curious too about, as a herbalist, how you bridge those two worlds together in your practice, and what sort of you are offering for folks in that way.
Yeah. Yay. I love this part of it. And this is very unique, but all the things I was saying of how early on I really felt the plants speaking to me, and I felt them on a very, again, physiological level. We could use the term energetic. I was feeling the energetics, right? And, the word energetic, it's used both in traditional Western herbalism to describe, the classic temperature, the moisture, and the tone of an herb. But it also, energy has deeper layers than that. So those are kind of like the most, not that they're just surface level, but they're the most surface level expressions that we can distill down about a plant. And then there's other layers and textures of its energy as well. And so this is kind of understanding and carving out really the personality of the plant and how it's moving through the body. And so the deeper that a person understands their own energy and how it moves, the deeper they're going to understand what's happening when they're interacting with a plant. And I find plants can really help a person learn about their own body and how they feel in their own body. And it can be a bit of a bridge builder for that. And also, as people become more sensitive, they pick up on the subtleties of plants as well. Of course, there's also just most of my clients are burned out, anxious, not sleeping the best, having digestive issues, chronic pain, all these kind of things. So there's the common physiological reasons why you would work with a plant. And I definitely incorporate those things. So we're like relaxing tension and, improving circulation to certain parts of the body, things like that. Um, and I really work with plants for their plant spirit medicine aspect and for literally rearranging the energy in somebody's body in a way that maybe, yes, the somatic work can do, but the plants take it deeper and incorporate in layers that I think the person likely either wouldn't have gotten to or wouldn't gotten to as quickly without the plant there as an ally and as a guide. So I see them like they are doing work in the background that I do not take responsibility for that in the sense that they are so powerful. And there's so much going on beyond what I can even always comprehend. But yes, basically in my practice, I do somatic work with people. And then at the end of the session, we will make a formula and it will be in alignment with whatever we're working on essentially throughout the session.
I love what you said there about the herbs doing work behind the scenes, because this is also something that I notice as well and have learned about the herbs as I've gotten into deeper relationship with them and guided other people in using them. And that's that they will always be doing something. However, if we meet them halfway, they will their capacity is even greater, right?
Mhm.
That medicine becomes much greater when we have that awareness, when we say, okay, thank you for what you're doing. I also want to show up and do what I can do. And it sounds like that these somatic practices and this exploration is really that's the other side of the work that can make both of those things exponentially, like a formula, like when you put more herbs together, you can create an exponentially more powerful medicine. It's very similar in this, and also a great reminder too that herbs are part of a holistic health plan, and there's not just ever one thing that is gonna increase our health, right? Or fix our symptoms or make us 100% healthy. It's a whole there's a whole world of things that need to be addressed and worked through.
Yeah, I would add to that, on the mental health side, because I spend a lot of time with other therapists and somatic therapists, and I feel like such a huge piece that's missing is that the focus. So I specifically studied relational and somatic therapy. So it's a lot about interpersonal relational dynamics and things. This is such a huge piece of missing is the engagement with non-human other beings and why that is such a huge piece of, again, this mental health, if we're calling it that, the picture of belongingness and connectivity. Such a big piece of people's mental health challenges is that they feel disconnected not only from their own bodies and themselves on a really deep, soulful level, but also from their community, and not just their human community, but the wider community that humans have always been a part of. And it is deeply harmful, in my opinion, to only focus on human to human relationships. It's very limited. And when I ask people, what are the things that help you feel the most yourself, the most regulated, the most connected? It is always nature. That's always the first thing that people answer. It is so ingrained and built into us. And yet it is not a part, again, of this mental health landscape, not spoken about, barely even looked at. One of my teachers, Daniel Four, has a course called Animistic Psychology, which I've just been obsessed with. I've been working through this course because it's the only other place where I've heard somebody acknowledge that other ways of knowing and other types of relationships are equally as valid as human to human connection. And there have been times in my life where my most important relationships was my relationship with cedar and hawthorn. And it wasn't the people in my life because actually those relationships weren't as secure and they felt tricky and sticky because I hadn't found that solidity in myself yet, but I could trust the plants and I could be myself around them. So I also wanted to mention that piece because I feel like I'm bringing a lot of the somatic work into herbalism, where I feel like that's been really missing. But I also feel like I'm bringing the herbalism and the land connection into the mental health world, and that's really missing. So these two worlds are not exclusive of each other. They really do need to find each other, and they are so deeply supportive on so many layers, beyond just the physiological medicine.
Yeah, absolutely, and beautifully put. I see that too as being, and have had that experience too of having connections with, maybe an animal friend or with the plants for sure. I felt like when I was really, really getting more serious about studying herbalism, the plants were one of my strongest and most safe, secure, reliable connections. And we have only lived a couple generations even in our Western world being this separated from plants. They've been a part of everything we have done as humans for our entire existence, right? They've been here longer than us. Our entire lives and evolution as humans and developments of our societies has been hand in hand with these incredible beings. And to have that just cut for the last really just couple generations, I would say for most folks, it's a wild, wild disconnect that, yeah, is not given nearly as much attention or weight when it comes to, I think, modern conventional treatments of mental health issues. And that, yeah, the focus on connection being get some friends. It's like human friends is like, well, it's so much more than that, even knowing what to do with plants and understanding. I do remember when I was very young, and it was sort of that when you're really young, and the people around you don't know about plants, they just tell you everything's poisonous, or sort of that,
Mhm.
every red berry is poisonous. I remember
Mhm.
hearing that as a child, and it terrified me away from learning about plants for quite a while. I was afraid of nature, and that I'm so grateful I was able to heal that. Now, on the other side of that, my parents were always bringing us out into the woods. Like I had a lot of other ways of connecting with nature, doing nature crafts, but for a safety's sake, there was sort of that messaging, and probably that mostly came from school than anything of like, don't touch nature. You can look, and it's
Mhm.
similar with conservation and the modern conservation efforts, which I have some questions and thoughts about. Is that really we as humans are wired to be in relationship with our environment. And when our environment is not nurturing and nourishing to us, like it can be when we're not going outside, we're not interacting with the greater, incredible, amazing world, like that is, yeah, that creates problems in the body for sure. So, yeah, awesome reminder. Um, yeah, to go back a little bit to the plants and the somatic work, I'm curious about, we have the class of herbs called nervines, of course, that act on the nervous system. Although I would, there's something, I actually did a talk for the Canadian Herb Conference recently that was about herbs for depression. The theme this year was the nervous system. And one of the things I kind of, after putting together that project, I was like, oh, I think people might be a little, I hope they're not disappointed after watching this, because I don't have like a list of these are the herbs for depression, right? Because in some way, anything can be a herb to treat something if it's the right herb for the right person.
Mhm.
So I did provide some suggestions and examples, but I also, the deeper I get in this world, I understand that that is true. There's not one single medicine, and herbs behave in so many different ways and have so many different ways of interacting with us. But that being said, I'm curious to hear what your experience is. It nervines that you're typically using with people for helping with somatic work, or what does the actual practice of that and the any notable plants? Of course, there's
Yeah.
many, I'm sure.
It's funny, Travis. So my partner Travis is also an herbalist, and we run our company together. But he always says every plant is a nervine because every plant does impact our nervous system, and every plant changes our our psychology and our ability to take in information and different layers of information, right? You notice when you're on something a little bit more stimulating versus calming, like the way you perceive the world changes. Um, and so that isn't only the classically labeled nervine herbs, although, of course, they have the strongest, most overt effect on the nervous system. So, indeed, that is like, the top plants that I would be working with are typically nervines for sure. But I definitely stray from that. And I do work primarily with local plants. And then I'll have, certain favorites that maybe don't grow here locally, that for specific clients, I think of something like Shizandra that isn't local to here, but I just love it and it's so unique and specific to a certain type of person. I find it really great for that scattered energy for people with ADHD or just scattered energy in general. It kind of is its own unique herb that I haven't found a replacement that's a local version. But yeah, in general, I try to work with locals as much as possible. I typically work with a lot of the classic nervines, so a lot of the milky ode and skullcap and blue vervain and a lot of tulsi. I work a lot with hawthorn. That is a very, very dear and special herb to me. Um, I ended up doing a lot of ancestral healing work as well and realized that that plant is so special because it's very deeply woven into my own heritage. I'm Celtic on my maternal side, but that's another layer that is a whole nother conversation. But often when we start working with plants that our people knew, our people being our ancestors, there's a deeper connection, and we might not even consciously know and realize that. And that happened for me with hawthorn, where it was one of my main herbs. It's been always our herb we go through the most of in our dispensary for years and years. And it wasn't until like maybe 2 years ago that I started doing this ancestral work, and hawthorn really just kept coming through so clearly to me. And I realized like, oh, there's a reason why I feel so connected to this plant and therefore give it to every single client. um, but yeah, so those are common ones. I work with cedar a lot. I know a lot of herbalists are a little bit worried about it because it is neurotoxic at higher doses, but it is so profound. One year I was at the Wild Rose, not you Wild Rose, a different Wild Rose festival, which is like an all women's festival that happens in Alberta. And they asked me to be there as a space holder, which is just someone who sits in a tent. And when people feel overwhelmed and have a lot coming up, because there's a lot of very deep emotional processing that happens at that event, they can pop by and just get a little bit of support. And I had a number of herbs there with me, but the one that everybody was drawn to throughout the days I was there was cedar. And people would come in so overwhelmed, and I would do a brief little grounding practice with them, get them into their body, give them one drop of cedar. And every time there'd be a deep breath, and then they'd be like, okay, I feel like I'm ready to go back out. So yeah, I really, like cedar and hawthorn are my plants that I personally work the most with in my own life, and that has helped me the most stay connected and grounded in myself. But I mean, again, it just depends on the person. And sometimes there are plants that aren't classically seen as a nervine that I will pull out because it just makes sense for that individual, whether it's because of some of their physical manifestations, because of all the stress they're under, or because it just has this energetic imprint that just seems to match them so perfectly that it is a fit. So, yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's really lovely what you said too about connecting with our ancestry through the plants. Well, yes, I do also think there is a lot we can learn and have relationship with plants that aren't necessarily from where our people are from. I have had had an experience like that. I remember going to my family are mostly British Isles, but specifically Ireland. My mother was born there, so I was able to go back, well, go and visit for the first time a few years ago. and arriving there in May when the hawthorn was in bloom. And it was, I had heard in Canada, like, oh, hawthorn grows between hedgerows. And I've seen the odd tree between a farmer's field, but to be there, see that, and really get to know that plant and understand like, what that meant and have that. I was crying the first time I saw that and was just so touched and did not expect to have, that kind of experience. I don't know what I expected. I didn't think about it. I really didn't think about it. I was excited to see the plants, to meet the plants I knew in their own, but I did not. Yeah, it was like a homecoming. That from Hawthorne. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And that's also, always been a dear ally to me. Are you, when you're speaking about cedar, Marie, are you talking about red cedar, Western red cedar?
Yeah, I am. That's what I'm working with. And yeah, and I use it usually as a drop dose medicine. So 1 to 5 drops kind of thing.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more too about what somatic practices or exercises you are using or could recommend for people. And is this something that you would always want to have a facilitator with? I know this can bring up a lot of things, but are there things we can be doing at home on our own also for folks who want to explore this more for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think that you do not need a facilitator to start learning about somatics, and it's your own body that you're learning about. So it makes it easier to have a facilitator because they can notice things that you might miss. It's so common, for example, for people to be in my office and I'll be like, "So, how are you feeling?" And they're like, "Great." And I'm like, "Really?" Because, I won't say this with these words, but their body's all crunched up and I can tell their breathing is shallow and I can tell that they're feeling like they're fidgeting their hands or whatever it may be. But I can see signs of clear distress that they're not fully settled, especially the very first appointment when they don't really know me yet. And then, I'll just ask further questions to help them discover that for themselves. So, so what tells you that you're feeling great? What does great feel like? Can you tell me more about that in the body? And then they're like, right. And then they start unpacking, okay, well, feeling great would be feeling like my body's soft, feeling like my feet are on the floor, feeling like I'm breathing steadily, right? And we start to map out, what does it actually mean when we say good? What does it actually mean when we say bad? Because that's often the only words that people really have to describe how they're feeling. And they don't actually know how to describe the more subtle. That isn't so subtle, but it seems subtle at first because we haven't taken the time to map it out before. So, all that to say is at the beginning, really, you're just wanting to ask yourself, on a physiological level, what is happening, right? And you can do that all on your own. You can check in right now if you feel like it. But notice, again, how are you holding your body? Is there more of a collapse? Is there more of an open, bright chest forward? Is there some guarding? Maybe you're covering, crossing your arms, covering your chest. Maybe, again, your body language is really open. Maybe you're fidgeting or shaking or something like that. Maybe you're relaxed. So these are clues and cues that your body is speaking to you. Also, things like a knot in the tummy, a knot in the chest, heaviness, lightness. These are all things that we're looking for. And you can map that out on your own. Why it's important to have a facilitator for the deeper work. So there's the discovering how you're feeling in the moment. There's finding tools for regulation in the moment. So these can be simply noticing, can sometimes help us to regulate. Um, Doing things like giving ourselves a hug, giving ourselves maybe rubbing gently on our arms, squeezing our hands together. These are little things that often can help people feel a little more regulated. Putting the feet on their floor, really feeling what the texture of your feet against the floor feels like, the texture of your socks, all these kind of little micro awareness moments can bring us into regulation. Regulation being often that we're in the present moment and we're perceiving that there's not actually a threat present. Our body is perceiving some kind of threat, but it's usually in the future or past tense, unless it's actually something bad happening in the present moment. But that's honestly probably pretty rarely the case if you were to be very, very present in the room that you're sitting in. And so it's really the more that we bring our awareness in, we get mindful, we build up our capacity for presence, then we can be more regulated. But that's different than digging into the past and undoing traumas and blockages and all of that kind of stuff. That's when you probably do want to have a practitioner with you because you need we use the word co-regulation, so a solid nervous system that's not getting dragged into your story and dragged into your past experiences that can be the safeguard in a sense to catch the edges when you don't know how to catch them. Because often when we haven't learned yet at the beginning, as soon as we start to think about trauma, think about past pains, think about things that have been painful, we get pulled into it and we lose track of the current moment. And it actually is traumatizing on the body to relive and replay those things over and over, which is part of why talk therapy can be tricky, is it can end up having somebody looping in a story rather than actually finding their way out of it. And so when there's another person present, they're going to catch when you're starting to, let's say, disassociate or get really dysregulated from whatever you're going into. And they're going to bring you back into present time and then build in tools to slowly taper and titrate that experience where you're dipping in and dipping out until you can actually tolerate being present while also potentially talking about or feeling aspects of a past experience that used to be too overwhelming to process.
Great. Thank you. That's that is big work. And yeah, I can see how the importance of having some support there. And also things we can do, yeah, on our own. I'm curious to hear too. We have talked a little bit already about this, some of the symptoms really of nervous system issues, dysregulation, or emotions, experiences being trapped in the body. Because I know from working with people, from my own experience, we can often be so unaware that
Mhm.
there is something going on. For my own example, I lived with it never was diagnosed, but probably could have been diagnosed as an anxiety disorder for so much of my life and had no awareness because that was my baseline.
Mhm.
That it wasn't until I really started to work on other things and my nervous system became a little more stable, I had more awareness. I realized, oh wow, I feel different than I did my whole life. And it's actually better. And I didn't know something was wrong, or I didn't know that this didn't have to be this way. So, for some folks who may not quite be there with that awareness yet, what are some things to look for that may suggest we need some support with that, or there's definitely capacity for more healing?
Yeah. So to understand why a nervous system wouldn't be regulated, because that will give us a lot of information. If your nervous system is dysregulated, it means that it's perceiving some kind of survival threat. So it doesn't need to be an actual survival threat. You can be perfectly safe, but there's a perception on a conscious or unconscious level. So just putting that into context, because it tells us a lot about, for example, anxiety. Why are we feeling anxious? We're feeling anxious because we feel unsafe, right? And so the symptoms are going to be, and with anxiety, it's specifically an upregulation of the nervous system. So it's a sympathetic, we could call it a mobilized energy, where the body is preparing to run. It is looking for ways out. So there will be this fast, wanting to keep things moving kind of experience because the body doesn't feel safe to slow down. And that's the same with upregulation. That could also be more of a irritation, aggression, frustration, right? Because that's the fight response. Again, it's that upregulation. We can also have a downregulation. Downregulation is when the body is starting to shut down For context, and a very extreme example of this would be a mouse playing dead, right? All mammals have the capacity to do that. And in extreme survival situations, we will literally we'll faint, we'll pass out, and all of our resources are basically going into protecting our vital organs. There's less blood flow to our limbs. So, what does that feel like on a not passed out, not fully expressed experience? Is we're going to feel lethargic, heavy, numb, and disconnected. And so, oftentimes, when people are experiencing chronic depression, what's happening is their nervous system is chronically shut down because, again, there's some kind of survival threat. Now, that survival threat, going back to the power conversation we had, that survival threat might be if I didn't stay dysregulated and manage my own energy, then it would come out. And if my energy came out, I wouldn't be safe and I would be rejected. And that feels very unsafe because we are wired for connection and community, because historically people lived in tribes, or whatever we want to use for that word, in small communities where we literally needed one another to survive. And so now, when we sense that the community might reject us if we were to be a fuller expression of ourselves, we often feel safer to go into one of these survival responses. And it's a way of managing our energy so that our authenticity doesn't come online, so that we don't risk rejection. And so, honestly, that for modern humans in the Western world who are not, not to say that nobody's facing true survival threats, of course people do, but many people, their main reason that they are chronically dysregulated is that they are terrified of themselves, and they're terrified of other people experiencing them and then rejecting them. And now, of course, there are people who have experienced genuine, violence and things that are physically unsafe in the body. And that is another reason why we might be chronically on edge and chronically dysregulated, because, again, we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen again. We're trying to make sure that we stay safe. So basically, if you're wondering, am I dysregulated? Check. Do you genuinely feel safe in the moment? Are you able to settle into yourself? And when I say settle into yourself, like inhabit your body, feel like all of you is inside of your whole being, occupying it. And there's a softness and an easefulness about that experience. And you feel like you're allowed to be yourself. And if not, then that tells you that there's at least a degree of dysregulation happening.
Yeah. And what you were saying about this is our body's survival mechanism, really, to sometimes to shut down. And I think that's a great reminder too, that the symptoms that we have are, in my experience and understanding, almost always self-protection mechanisms. Our physical symptoms, emotional, mental, all interrelated, of course, but they really are. And so remembering that compassion towards ourselves and our bodies, and actually being grateful for that information, I find can be a really helpful reframe as well, as opposed to this. It's very easy to get into that loop of what is wrong with me and why do I feel this way, and what is, turn that back in on ourselves, right? Which then creates even more stress and anxiety. And being able to recognize that almost always when there's dysfunction in our body or in a system, it is actually coming from a place of the body wanting to heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, wanting to protect itself. At the end of the day, um, our bodies are so wise, and they're communicating exactly how you actually feel, and how you feel is based on your past experiences. So they're a direct map and key to unlock your history so that you can write something new. Because until we unravel unprocessed trauma and charge that's in the nervous system. For context, when you experience something that hasn't been processed, what's left over is a charge, like an electrical charge, and that sits in the body. And until it's processed and moved through, it will run your life, because you will do anything to either avoid it or reactivate it or have some kind of complex relationship with it, that keeps you there and that keeps you locked into that moment, whether you recognize you're doing it or not. And the body will keep bringing you back there again and again and again until it's resolved. So, as annoying as it is, and it can be so frustrated, and we can be frustrated with our bodies, but your body is like, here is the map and here is the key. And if you follow the exact cues I'm giving you, you will get resolution, but you have to do the brave work of following it. And it is really scary and uncomfortable, but trusting that your body is trying to help you ultimately.
Yeah, and I'm curious a little too about the importance of being authentic to ourselves and the difficulties that come along with doing that in our society, where not everybody has a place that feels safe to express themselves or is in a community. I mean, it sounds like in your early life, that was certainly something that you struggled with and had to confront. And so, if you have any, suggestions, especially this day and age, we're living in this very disparate, like black and white thinking, and people having very strong opinions about how we should be behaving, presenting, dressing,
Mhm.
identifying, that seem, very in conflict with what a lot of people's actual truth and experience of themselves is. So, yeah, any suggestions on what we can do? We can't change the entire world, although I know some of us want to try, but what we can do to support ourselves when getting that, yeah, that support might not be as much of an option.
Mhm. I think it starts with being honest with ourselves. You know, there's one thing there's one thing to look outside of ourselves and be like, "Well, if I was to wear this, say this, be this, do this, I would be rejected," right? It's another thing to just actually start by tuning your awareness in and letting yourself go deep enough into yourself to even know what you want. A lot of people won't even let themselves go there because it's scary and we don't want to admit to what we want. And we often have a lot of shadow wrapped up in that. So, a lot of guilt or shame or whatever it may be because we've been told that that's wrong. And that was very much my experience. Like when I wanted to start getting into plants and magic and try tarot cards and learn about astrology, like I was terrified. And that might seem strange to people, but like in context of how I had been raised, I literally, on a nervous system level, even though I didn't consciously believe this, I thought I was going to be possessed because that's what I'd been told for my whole life is if you open yourself up to these ways of being, you will be possessed. And that sounds so strange to most people who haven't experienced it, but it's some serious stuff to unpack. It was a big job to unpack that. So I had to start with getting honest with myself and admitting to myself that I even liked those things, that I was even curious about those things. And then again, doing the work of, okay, wait. Okay, so it's not safe to be this around my family, but would it be safe around this friend who clearly has a tarot card deck and is offering to do a reading? Could I take a risk and open myself up just a little bit to experience this little piece of myself in a safe container? And so it might not be that in every space out in the world, you're always 100% of yourself. If you feel like you need to protect yourself in certain spaces and containers, and maybe even 99% of the time, then you do what you need to do. But also get really curious and get really honest. Is that actually 100% always true? And chances are that there are ways that you can access more of yourself and feel more authentic and more aligned and healthier, whether it's in private or whether it's in small ways with special friends or whatever it may be. Maybe it's an online community where you don't even need to see people in real life. Like you get to explore that the way that feels authentic to you. But that's the big piece is that realizing the fear will come up and we need to decipher, is this fear here because it's actually a survival issue and it's truly unsafe for me to pursue this thing right now? Or is it here because I'm afraid of being rejected and that may not even be relevant to this circumstance, but it's a historical memory on a body level. So I assume it's going to happen again. Right. So it's a lot of presence and a lot of facing uncomfortable emotions.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have a example of a time where you have done some work, somatic and herbal together, and it's created a significant shift? I'm sure you've got many, but we'd love to hear about this in action, really in action.
Yeah. Would that be like with myself or with a client?
I was thinking more with a client, but whichever you feel is, more interesting or
Yeah. Yeah,
crucial.
I mean, definitely. I have worked with a lot of people who have gone through breakups, not because of me, because I do not tell people to break up with their partners, but a lot of situations where people come in. Um, I'll use a specific example just because you asked, but like I can think of a client who came in so anxious, just feeling super disconnected from themselves, lots of mental health challenges, very sensitive, very emotionally intelligent person, but they weren't allowed to be that in their relationship. And so as we started to do the work and they got to know themselves more deeply, and there was this essentially me telling them, validating them, you're allowed to feel the way you feel, and how you feel is real. Even if your partner doesn't understand it or believe it or whatever it may be, your experience is real and you're actually very emotionally intelligent and you're very tapped in. And as they gained confidence, they ended up going through a breakup. And that's hard. Of course, it's always hard to go through breakups. But on the other side, they were so much more themselves. They were so much more connected. They ended up working through a lot of this anxiety that they'd been coming in with, but they had to go through again the hard thing of facing as they got closer to themselves, they faced the truth, the mirror that was in front of them that that this person was actually pulling them away from themselves and keeping them stuck in a pattern of disconnection. And so these kind of things happen a lot where when you start to work with herbs, which herbs tend to really hold up a mirror and teach you about yourself, and when you start to work with somatics, a lot of my clients, again, unprompted by me, I'm not telling people to leave their partners and whatever else, but they end up leaving partners, leaving jobs, launching businesses, like doing the hard, scary things that they want to do at the core of their being, but they're too scared to do. Um, yeah, I would say that's a very common experience. I've seen people work through a lot of chronic pain, lots of chronic people pleasing, just people who in the past just haven't had the confidence to speak their mind and to pursue what is authentic to them. And then people finally starting to do their art and do their whatever it may be that's authentic, and it just starts to emerge. It's like this beautiful blossoming of a flower when people give themselves time to really go there.
Yeah. Yeah, I have seen similar experiences. Again, I am never suggesting anybody is, who they should be in relationship with, but I've definitely witnessed folks, particularly one person with like a skin condition. They had an on and off again partner, and when they were on, this skin condition was flared up. And when they were off, it went away and they
Mhm.
realized it. And
Mhm.
this was a while ago, but they definitely are aware that there was a strong connection there. I mean, very clear connection. But yeah, and same, yeah, with jobs too. Yeah, I've seen this time and time again where physical symptoms actually do lessen the more in alignment we are with our true selves. And that is big, deep, scary work too. Yeah. So we're lucky to have folks like you, Marie, who are out there supporting and offering support through this. I did want to touch too on what you said about the mirror, um, these mirrors in our lives, and the plants kind of can mirror some of these things back. How do the plants themselves mirror or teach us about embodiment and presence?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the plant because of course they each have their own way of taking us on a journey. But to me, they entrain us to inhabit ourselves in different ways. So I'll take Hawthorne as an example because I've already gushed over her so much. But Hawthorne, of course, is very associated with the heart. And many people who are disconnected from themselves are very disconnected from their heart, right? We're ignoring the cues and the authenticity that lives in the heart and the deep, deep heart knowing. or we're maybe our heart is overly open and we're gushing all over the place because we don't feel safe enough to have boundaries. So we're kind of just in this constant energetic exchange with everybody and anything that comes into our field, and we feel overwhelmed and, whatever else. So whether it's a closed heart or an overly open heart, Hawthorne really helps us to modulate those gates and to find our way to settle in and occupy our own space, so we don't need to give away so much of our energy and desperately be trying to get it from other people, and that there can be a healthier exchange with other people from the heart space when we do choose to do that. And we have a little more choice around it, or not a little, we have a lot more choice around it, and we can be very specific about how we do that. So to me, Hawthorne really taught me that, of really taught me how to anchor into my heart, and then showed me that I was spilling, that I was spilling in many ways, but also that I was closed off in others. I kind of had both things going on depending on the circumstance. And so I would say different plants work with different systems of the body and so on, but they kind of anchor us in and train us and teach us a thing. And then oftentimes we can carry that forward even when we're no longer taking that herb anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Beautiful.
Mm,
The plants are so amazing.
they are. They really are.
And on that note, how do you see? I think my understanding of what I'm seeing is that the understanding of our relationships between our bodies, our symptoms, our physicality, everything that is becoming much more forefront in mainstream healthcare and understanding. And also just want to remind folks, this isn't new information. The way that we talk about it, though, is different, and the way that it is measured, right, in our modern scientific, what would you call that, like the instruments we have, to gauge what we do in this day and age, they're different than they once were, but it is not new concepts. That there is huge connection. That's just something that's been known in I would say most traditional healing traditions, is that there is a interconnectedness, holism, this idea of vitalistic energy, or chi, prana, lots of different names for it, but it does show up, it exists. These more holistic ways of seeing the body have been the norm, actually, for a vast majority of our human history. Kind of shifted away from that during this period where we got very intellectual, stuck in our heads. And funny thing too that happened, right? Disconnected from our bodies the last few hundred years. This has really been happening. And the modern medical community, these scientific advancements, started to see things a little more black and white, cut and dry, disconnected. But now that is all actually coming full circle again. And we're seeing that with the work of, like, Bessel van der Kolk's work on, was that The Body Keeps the Score? I think that was his book, right? That one, that really became really big. And we've even seen, I have noticed a huge change in the way that counselors and therapists practice, even just in the last 20 years, with a shift away from that talk therapy that was pretty standard for a long time, to much more embodied somatic work, and new practices being developed. And also, by new, I would say there are really older things that are being more adapted to the modern age, which is great to see. So again, this isn't new stuff, but it's more in the consciousness and the mainstream again, and that's so awesome to see. So how do you see that progressing alongside, like, herbs? Do you have, an idea or vision of herbalists, maybe having a little more training in this stuff? That would be great. It's something
Mhm.
that's always interested me. I've sought it out on my own, but yeah, what do you see for the future of herbalists with this somatic understanding?
Oh, absolutely. I I find it astonishing that I didn't know this information when I left school. To me, it truly is kindergarten baseline, the 101 of how to be in a body. Every health practitioner needs to know basic information about polyvagal theory, which is understanding these responses and how the different nervous system states that you can be in, essentially. Um, it's not acceptable, actually, that people don't have that information, in my opinion. And I have been, yeah, teaching it a lot at different herb conferences and things like that. That's been a big priority of mine, to help more herbalists to gain this information, because I think it's, even if you're not focusing on mental health, as we've both named in this conversation, you are. Whether you like it or not, you are. And people's history is held in their body. So if they are showing up with a skin condition, with a UTI, with a whatever, they are bringing their whole human history into that space, including their epigenetic, intergenerational trauma. All of it is present. And so you can ignore it if you want, or you can actually get to the root and be willing to take on a broader perspective. Um, and that very much is where herbalism is going. It's where healthcare is going, like you've said. It's really nice to see that more and more people are curious about it. But what I notice is people don't necessarily always know where to get the information. It's like, oh, yeah, embodiment, that, or somatics, that sounds interesting. Or like, I'd like to pursue that. But there's not a lot of really good mapped out, um, you know, places where I've seen it taught in schools and whatnot yet. I think it's improving. I think every patient communication class should have that. It should just be a baseline. If somebody's teaching a mental health class, it absolutely should be woven in as a baseline. So yeah, it's going in that direction. I think it will take time, as anything does. But I really do see this just becoming a normal part of the conversation. And I see a lot of young people really taking it on and understanding the embodiment piece more and more, which is really exciting to see. And I did teach a class for Wild Rose that does live in the Wild Rose Village, about for practitioners. It's just maybe an hour or 90 minutes long, of some ways that you can incorporate some of this stuff in.
Yes, yes, we do have that in the village. That's a great class. And what you said too about every healthcare practitioner really should have some training in this. That's so true. When we see that right now, we're finally understanding and connecting that stress, which is huge and can mean a lot of different things, is at the root of every illness. Like, is part of the root of every illness. And
Mhm.
what you've shared with us about understanding how this stress, what that really is, I feel like you've given a much clearer explanation of what this sort of mythical, like non-direct stress really is, although there is kind of a directness to it, but as opposed to something, like a crushing work deadline, or like a
Mhm.
not getting enough sleep, these things that obviously contribute to stress. But there's also that sort of underlying chronic sort of nobody really understands, like, why is
Mhm.
everyone so stressed out? And I feel like you've given us a clear reason why so many of us do still live with and carry this sort of mystical, mythical stress that's leading to all our symptoms. So that's really helpful to put some context around that and what's going on, and how we can help ourselves and find the help we need. And speaking of that, Marie, where do we find you if someone wants to connect with you? Or do you have classes? You do have a clinical practice. Tell us more about what you offer.
Yeah. So my partner and I have a company together. It's called Althea Herbals. I will spell it because people often miss one of the A's. So it's Altheaea. That's the Latin spelling of Althea, the marshmallow plant. You can find us on Instagram at Althea Herbals. I post there a lot. We have a website, of course, altheaherbals.com. And yeah, so we both are clinicians. I, of course, do the somatic work and the herbalism. He mostly works in cancer care, with herbalism. And then we do teach courses on and off throughout the year. We've kind of just started one of our longest courses of the year. It just got going about a month ago, but I will be teaching some more of the mental health type stuff coming into the winter. So if you just follow along on Instagram or jump on our newsletter, whatever it may be, you'll see whatever our next things are to come.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much, Marie. This has been an incredible conversation. And just thank you so much for your wisdom, for all the hard work you've done to be able to gather this, share it with us. I've definitely learned a lot, and yeah, and just feeling really inspired too by your work. So thanks.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye bye.